Hello, friends, and welcome back for episode 16 of the Footnotes podcast. We've been doing this now for several months, and it has just been so much fun. Such a joy to continue these conversations each and every week on topics, sermons that hopefully are resonating with you. They're relevant to your life. I would think that would be especially true given the sermon yesterday. If you missed the sermon yesterday, we talked all about rest and how to not just find, but create, intentionally make more time to be restored, to be rejuvenated. And if you're listening to this on Monday or Tuesday, I am presently taking my own medicine. I am practicing the very thing I just preached. Me and three buddies of mine, pastor buds, organized a trip several months ago to go on a golf trip in the mountains. And so while if you're listening to this in North Carolina, in the sweltering 95-degree heat, I am presently in some mountain town where the high is like mid-70s. So it is wonderful. It's going to be, it's such a gift to be able to have these opportunities. For me, there is a couple of key ingredients for what qualifies as a restful thing for me. Getting out of town is one of them. Just getting out of my norm, getting out of my routine. Being with people who are quote unquote easy, just people I can be safe with, I can be my natural self with. And then another key ingredient is doing some sort of activity to replace the work activity that I'm trying to take a break from. Now, the verdict is still out as to whether or not golf is restful in that way. I have a complicated relationship with golf. When I first started playing, I'm an Enneagram 3. I've shared that before. I'm super competitive. I want to win and be the best at everything. And I am just never going to be that in golf. And it took me a long time to come to that realization. It took me a long time to just realize, listen, this just ain't ever gonna be something that you are great at. And so I've had to accept that. I've had to sort of come to terms with that. And I'll tell you what, maybe this is a little hack for you. Maybe this has nothing to do with golf. Maybe this has something to do with something else. But what has changed and has made in my life so for me, this activity of golf restful is I made a shift to where I legit do not keep score at all anymore. Now, again, for Enneagram 3s out there, that feels like, what? How? That makes no sense. What's the fun in that? But I made this shift about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I can tell you, ignorance is bliss on the golf course. It is something to where I'm like, people will ask me, like I'll make the round around the corner at 9 to go to hole 10, and like I'll bump into a friend. They'll be like, hey, what'd you shoot? I'm like, don't know. Don't know. Don't want to know. And so I don't know, maybe that's a hack or a tip for you. Maybe you've got like this activity or something in your life that, you've always enjoyed, but maybe you're just like you're in a difficult sort of spot in your relationship with it, right? Sometimes I'll encounter artists who will go through this. Maybe music or visual art has been this restful exercise for you a long time, but then at some point it shifted and you started putting a lot of pressure on it. You started your perfectionist tendencies sort of started creeping in. I would sort of just commend to you the equivalent of not keeping score on the golf course, whatever that equivalent is for you, to make it, I don't know, just make it purely fun, and I don't know, see how it goes for you. See if the relationship changes, see if the relationship with that activity improves. And so anyway, that's where I am at present. I am at present taking my own medicine. I am practicing the very thing that I just preached yesterday. And so without further ado, let's dig into some more of this conversation, because again, oh my gosh, I feel like we could preach I could probably preach 10 sermons a year on rest and Sabbath, and we would still need more. We, especially here in this context, in this world in which, I live in suburbia and the like, it just feels to me like this is something that we could always hear reminders of. And so anyway, let's dig into the format. Ready? Let's get right back into the format and share a little bit more on this conversation that did not make it into the sermon. Let's talk a little bit more about some things that A, you might find interesting, B, you might want to try, and towards the end I'll just share a little bit more about my own relationship with rest and Sabbath and where I'm still struggling. So something you might find interesting. Some of you caught this. That in my sermon yesterday, when I was particularly beginning to dig into the book of Hebrews, some of you caught that I used the pronoun she, when discussing the author. And this was very intentional. Because the reality is, and I want to be factual, I want to be accurate. The reality is we don't know who the actual author is of the book of Hebrews. It is one of the books of the Bible that is written anonymously. It's one of the books of the Bible that has a lot of different theories as to who actually wrote it. Most credible scholars are out on Paul. They're like, there's too many different literary techniques found in the book of Hebrews that don't match with Paul. Like if you read Paul's writings in other places, this doesn't sound, quote unquote, like him. But there's a lot of different theories out there as to who could have written this book. And one of the prevailing ones is the New Testament female leader in the church, Priscilla. And and by the way, go back and reread your New Testament, particularly read the Gospels, and you'll just find there's so many more women. Even though not a single book of the Bible is attributed to a woman explicitly, there's just so many women who are playing this vitally important role, not only in the gospel, but also in the biblical story, right? I'm thinking of the story of Ruth. I'm thinking of the story of Esther, if we're looking as far back as the Old Testament. But no book is explicitly gives sort of authorship to a female leader in the church. But many scholars at least hypothesize that maybe it could have been Priscilla. It might have been Lydia, a couple of these other key instrumental female leaders in the church. And I guess why I find that particularly interesting, beyond the just sort of obvious, right, that if that is in fact true, that this is one of the only, books of the Bible, letters written to the early church, written by one of our female leaders in the early church, not for obvious reasons, that is super interesting. But I also just find it interesting given this is the way in which it had to happen, right? One could make the argument that the fact that this book is anonymous and this is what scholars sort of presuppose, they posit that the fact that it is anonymous is actually kind of like credence to the possibility that this was a female author, because if it was in fact a female author, they would have to, during this time, during the first century, during this very patriarchal culture, that's such a hard word for me to say, they would have had to anonymize their own work in order to be heard, right? They would have needed, because, and during that time, females were not allowed, women were not allowed to lead, to hold official positions, particularly in the church. And so she would have had to anonymize her work in order to make sure that this message that she had, this wisdom that God had given to her, this teaching that God had given to her, made it into the hearts, the minds, the souls of God's people. And on the one hand, that is very sad. I want to lament that. On the one hand, that's very sad that if the author of Hebrews was in fact a woman, and the tactic she had to take was she had to anonymize her own work, her own brilliance, her own intelligence, her own spiritual maturity, just because of the time in which she lived. On the one hand, I feel that is very sad. That breaks my heart, especially as I think about even today. My female colleagues in ministry who are serving in denominations or serving in churches where their leadership and their pastoral authority is regularly undermined. So on the one hand, it makes me sad. I will also say, pardon my language, but I also find that if that was the case, it's also pretty badass. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of badass. I'm thinking about I'm thinking of like in movies, right? Think of like Mulan, right? This is like the first example I feel like as a young kid I got exposed to this. It's like this woman who is a warrior, wants to fight, wants to step in and defend her family and her country, and she can't do it simply on account of her being a woman. And so what does she do? She cuts her hair. Disney has that like beautiful song, "I make a man out of you." Yeah, like that whole that whole bit. Like it was so cool, so empowering, so inspiring. Right, thinking of that example. And so I guess on the one hand, I find it very sad, and on the other hand, I just think it's super cool. And also just like good on her that she did not allow the customs, the societal norms to keep her from being faithful to who God called her to be, the message, the wisdom, the learnings that God had given to her, and so obviously had given to her to share and spread with the church. What a travesty it would have been. What a tragedy it would have been if the church missed out on particular things that God wanted to give to us simply because we denied the medium. We denied the means of that grace and of that revelation, the ability to do so simply on an account of societal norm or something like that. So also like a good word of challenge, right? A good word of challenge for us to like, obviously don't judge a book by its cover, but also just like don't discount the fact that God is using people all the time, or wants to use people all the time, who society is tempted to discredit, to diminish, to invalidate. Maybe the book of Hebrews and so many stories in the Bible are a testament to, and when we do that, we do so at our own peril, right? So something you might find interesting, something you might find interesting, that the book of Hebrews, there's a lot of scholarship out there that put forward the strong hypothesis that this might have been one of the only books in the entire Scripture, both the Old Testament and the New, that was written, composed by a woman, by one of the brilliant female leaders in our midst. Okay, so that's something you might find interesting. That we didn't get a chance to really chat much about yesterday. Let's talk about some things you might want to try. In my sermon yesterday, I just mentioned, like I said, just sort of outright, that this was not going to be one of those practical sermons. This was not meaning it was not going to be one of those like super tangible, here's a bunch of tips, here's a bunch of guidance, here's a bunch of advice on how you can rest. It wasn't on the how, it was more on the why. Why is it that we're so unwilling to, live into our own limitations and take more breathers and find more rest? Like we talked, that was more of what the sermon was about, right? But today I did want to give you some of that, because as I was preparing the sermon, that was one of the routes I thought about taking. I thought about taking the route of making this more practical and tangible and giving actual guidance and tips for how to do this. And the reason why this was definitely a part of my preparation process is because as pastor, I cannot tell you how many times I've engaged with someone over a coffee meeting or in my office or after a sermon where we just talked about rest, we just talked about Sabbath, we just talked about creating and carving out more time to be rejuvenated and be restored. And I cannot tell you how many times the first response from the person that I'm talking to is they give me a laundry list of reasons as to why they can't, right? I can't, you don't understand, Pastor. Like that's good for the person whose schedule, whose life, whose responsibilities affords them the luxury, affords them the ability of taking 24 hours off every single week. I can't do that. And then they will rattle off a bunch of reasons, some of which very, very valid, some of which very, very valid. Some of you are a single mom or a single dad. You're working a couple of full-time jobs, a full-time job, a part-time job. Some of you are caregivers to maybe it's aging parents, or maybe you're in that sandwich generation. You've got also caretaking responsibilities to your children or to your grandchildren below you, right? And so you're constantly having that demand placed upon you. Maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home dad who you're like, dude, I feel you, but like I got an infant and I got a toddler. And so like how, to rest in a like ideological sense, to just take a bunch of time and, space away from my family feels not only undoable, but it feels irresponsible, right? So here's what I want to say. If your reaction to my sermon yesterday was to like immediately that's what you were thinking, you were like, oh, there's so many reasons why I can't do this. The first question I would just have for you is just like, are these actual reasons or are these excuses? Okay, so that's just something for you to answer. I'm not, judging nobody. I'm not, pre-deciding that I already know, or I'm not making these assumptions that I know. But you need to wrestle with that question. Are these real reasons or are these excuses? Okay? And if they're excuses, well, then you know what you got to do. But if they're reasons, let's play that out a little bit. If these are legit actual reasons, you have a crazy demanding job with a ton of responsibility. You have at home or caregiving responsibilities. You have people who depend and rely upon you. Let's say you just have in the season of life that you're in, or the plot, the plot of life you've been given, right? Maybe, I was speaking with someone not too long ago whose child was born with a permanent disability. And so for them, that will always be a responsibility that they hold, right? And so just for a preacher to come along, just be like, well, you got to rest more. That can be harmful. That can be harmful. That can hurt. That can add to the burden you're already feeling. And I don't want to do that. So, but here's what I do want to do. If you are someone who you have legitimate reasons for why you've been unwilling or unable to rest more, what I do want to do is I want to spend a little time here in the second section, to give you things to try, to give you things that you can actually try that are actually reachable, that are actually doable. I think if you're anything like me, even when you have really valid reasons that you can't do something, what you don't focus on, what you don't spend enough time on is creatively imagining, okay, well, I can't do X, Y, and Z, but what can I do? What is within the realm of possibility, right? And so let's say you are listening to this and your job is crazy demanding, okay? Your job is crazy demanding. And to go from 0 to 100, to go from not resting at all to then just having all these perfectly maintained boundaries where you're taking a full day off or two and you're I don't know, just living in that zone. Maybe what you need are some like steps to move you. What can you do, right? So like, here's an example. Here's some things you can try. Try this week. Try eating your lunch without multitasking. Try eating your lunch on your lunch break and actually treating it like a break. I don't care what you do. Eat outside on a picnic table. Fart around on your phone. Pull up an episode of a funny show that you watch and, turn it on while you're sitting there grubbing down on your salad or your sandwich or whatever it is that you're doing. But eat your lunch on your lunch break without multitasking. Speaking of which, maybe that's not really appealing to you. That's not very restful for you. Maybe it's using your lunch break to exercise, to go for a walk, to leave your phone at your desk, and to some of you work in places that have like sidewalks around or greenways around your office spaces, or maybe you work from home and you've got a greenway attached to your neighborhood. Spend your lunch break going for a walk. Maybe for you, it's again, you're like, dude, I always hate these conversations at church talking about rest because like I can't. My job is not such that I can take an entire day off and be away from my team and my responsibilities for 24 straight hours. Okay. Can you start with turning your phone on Do Not Disturb for 1 hour on a Friday afternoon? Can you work ahead? Can you get to a place in your work to where you're like, okay, I've done everything I need to do, and for an hour, maybe even 2, you turn your work phone on Do Not Disturb and just watch the effects it has on your psyche, on your body, not having to be quote unquote on all the time. Maybe another suggestion, maybe another thing you might want to try is just taking all of your daggum vacation days, right? Maybe for you, you work in an environment where it's like, it kind of comes in waves. It comes in seasons. When there's big projects at your job, you're all in working crazy hours. But then you do have seasons where you can take your vacation days that have been allotted to you and be gone for a week or be gone for several days, right? Did you know this, by the way? The Labor Bureau produced this statistic a couple years ago or so that found that 50% of the American workforce does not take all their vacation days. I wonder if that's true for you. Take all your vacation days. That's maybe something you want to try. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about like working at home. The work that's not at a job, but the work that is just a part of your relationships. It's a part of your family, right? Maybe you're a caregiver. Maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home dad. Here are some things you might want to try. Maybe you can't. Again, maybe you can't because of the season of life that you're in, with the age of kids or the condition or the that your kids are presently in. Maybe you can't leave them or be away from them for an entire day. Okay. What you could do is ask if you have the financial means to do so, hire someone to come and to be with your loved ones, to be with your children, to be with your aging parents for an hour, for 2. Again, you don't have to go to Cancun for 8 days. Like, you don't have to. Again, I think sometimes when it comes to rest, we judge ourselves over and against the ideal, and that's just not a realistic next step. Maybe for you, it's asking someone you trust, paying someone that you trust to come and to be with the person that you've been charged with caring for. Maybe for you, it's just simply lowering the standards that you set for yourself. Maybe it's, hey, I'm going to give myself permission 2-3 times a week to lower the dinner standard. We're just going to order. We going Domino's. These kids are going to be eating Lunchables. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just need 1 or 2 days a week where I don't have to prepare yet another meal, right? Maybe the standard is not just with meal. Maybe it's with cleanliness, right? Maybe you're like, in an ideal scenario, you are just tackling all the chores every single day, every single week, and maybe you just say, look, 2 days a week, I ain't cleaning jack crap. Like, sorry to be crass, but like, 2 days a week, I ain't cleaning nothing. I'm gonna let all this thing kind of run amok, and then 2 days later, we'll come back and we'll make it happen, right? These are just sort of some ideas I'm just trying to kind of put on your radar. One last one I'll leave you with, and we'll move on, is just like, again, maybe some of those I just gave you, maybe even those are too intimidating, right? Even those are too much. I don't know. I don't presume to know everybody's situation who's tuning into these episodes and what limitations you do and don't have. But let's say that you are just someone who even an hour is unrealistic. It's undoable right now. I had a pastor and spiritual director who used to say that sometimes the only thing we can offer, the only thing that's available to us, and he's kind of basing this in the Psalms. If you go and read the Psalms, have you ever seen that sometimes the Psalms are broken up with this Hebrew word Selah? Selah. And what that is it's meant to be a point of rest, a point to take a break, to breathe, to quote the Psalm, be still. And so he had this practice that he prescribed to me one time during a season where I was very overcommitted, very preoccupied. And he said, if you can't find an hour, you can't find a day, you can't find an hour, can you find 5-minute pockets? 5-minute pockets to practice this Salah rest, take 5 minutes and maybe just walk outside, stand in the sun. Leave your phone. Don't bring it with you. Stand out in the sun. Take 5 minutes and just literally close your eyes. Listen to your favorite music. Listen to music that grounds you, that helps you take a true deep breath in. Take 5 minutes. Go outside. Watch the birds. Take 5 minutes. Light a candle and read one of the Psalms and read it slowly, right? Maybe for others of you, again, it's a 5-minute walk. It's a 5-minute drawing break. Maybe you're an artist, and maybe that's your outlet. But I guess my whole point is simply, I think when it comes to rest, I think there's a lot of us who listen to this conversation. We get super defensive. We come up with all these reasons, some of which are real, some of our excuses for why we can't rest. And I would just challenge you. What can you do? I know, I hear you. I believe you. What you can't do. What can you do? You're too important. You're too important to God. You're too important to your family. You're too important to all the people who are relying upon you to continue to neglect yourself. What is the great commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as who? Yourself. It's all predicated upon whether or not you've got anything in the tank to give to God, to neighbor, etc. Okay, and that is a great segue. That's a great segue to where I want to close this out. So something I'm still struggling with. So one of the things that I'm still wrestling with, and I probably always will, I've kind of accepted the fact that I probably always will wrestle and struggle with this, is when other people are calling out for me. They need something from me, they need my help. How do I know when I ought to keep a boundary and say, nope, sorry, I'm out of town, I'm out of pocket, I'm out of reach right now? And when do I need to lower the boundary and kind of switch out of Sabbath mode, switch out of rest mode, and care for this person, this thing that's asking for my help, asking for my attention? The reason why I'm asking this question is because of what we see in the Gospels, right? Like, in the Gospels, there's a passage particularly in Mark chapter 6 where Jesus and his disciples, they've been preaching, they've been teaching, they've been helping people all daggum day, probably for many, many days in a row. And then in Mark chapter 6, there's this moment where, this crowd comes to Jesus. They still find him. He's like, hey, we got to go rest. It says, I think in Mark 6, it says like, hey, we got to go rest. You got to go rest. I got to rest. I got to take some time with the Father. And the crowd finds him. They're sneaky. They hunt him. They hunt him down. They find him, and they're begging for help. They're begging for food. They're begging for, again, just they need him again. And what's fascinating is in that moment, it says that Jesus, saw them. He had compassion for them, And so he kind of snaps out of, the rest, the quiet time, the restful time that he was having, that he had carved out to take care of his neighbor, right? And so I just don't know. I find myself constantly battling this tension because I don't want to be someone who is so codependent on other people that I'm always putting down my boundaries. I don't want to become the person that is so reliant upon people's perception of me, and I'm just to be so obsessed with. I mean, one of my idols that I'm trying to renounce in my life is my people pleasing tendencies. I don't want to be the type of person that is held in bondage to that so much that I'm frequently and constantly abandoning rest, abandoning the time and the space that for me and for God to rest and restore and be rejuvenated. I don't want to be the type of person that is constantly abandoning that and neglecting that in order to take care of all of the people who need or want something from me. And on the other hand, I also don't want to be someone who's so cold-hearted that I take myself and I take my rest so seriously that I'm unwilling to help, or even unwilling to help people who cry out to me and are in need, right? And that's happened, right? Like, I mean, I'm a pastor, and Fridays are typically my day off, and it happens. Sometimes people will call me and say, the coffee maker is broken at church. That doesn't require me necessarily to, break my Sabbath and then rush over to the church. That ain't urgent, right? But as pastor, I get calls frequently on my day off of people in the hospital. There's a death in the family. There's a neighbor who has come to the doors of our church seeking financial or just seeking food. And so I don't want to be somebody who's so turned off or so switched off or so hardened that I can't help either. And so I think what I would just say is to you is like, if I think one thing that's kind of helping me with this struggle, again, I'm always going to struggle with it, I think, is I think one of the things I ask myself regularly is I ask, obviously, is it urgent? Is it urgent? Is this person's cry for help and cry for, my aid? Is it urgent? That's the first question I sort of ask myself. Second question I ask myself is this something Jesus is going to hold me accountable for later? Like, what I'm saying? Is this something that Jesus might be like, come on, dude, like that? We're talking about someone who was hungry, someone who was needy, someone who was, really, this exactly what I talked about in the Gospels, right? Is this something like that? Those are some questions that I sort of put through, like, and like maybe a bigger question is like, why do I want to jump in to help, right? And we talked about this in the sermon yesterday, so I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but if my ego or my pride, or again, like I talked about a minute ago, my codependency, my need to be needed, if that's the thing that's sort of inciting me to break out of Sabbath mode, to break out of rest mode, and to get back involved with this person or this thing at work, that feels like another pretty clear indicator as to whether or not I ought to get involved. And I guess I would just say this. One other thing I would just say is that if you are someone, by the way, and I know a lot of pastors who experience compassion fatigue, compassion burnout, and they reach this place where now they do take the time to rest and rejuvenate and to refrain from certain work and certain responsibilities, but they waited too long. Maybe that's you. Maybe you waited a little bit too long, and now if you're really honest, there's some bitterness, there's some resentment whenever people ask you for help. What I would say is that is a sign, that is a signal that outside of your rest periods, you're running too hard. you're pushing a limit too fast. Like maybe like a car analogy, you're redlining too much. If when you are in that Sabbath mode, that rest mode, that retreat mode, and anytime anyone tries to pierce that bubble and ask for your help, you're filled with anger, hatred, resentment. What that is that is a sign that when you're in work mode, you're pushing it too hard. You're going too hard, you're running too fast, you're running too hard. And the only solution for that is not a longer vacation. It's not a sabbatical. And take it from me, I have taken a sabbatical. A sabbatical is not a solution for an unsustainable lifestyle. The only solution to an unsustainable lifestyle is a sustainable lifestyle. Okay? And so, if you're like me, and this is a struggle of yours as well, God, when should I sort of break my day off or break my Sabbath, break my rest in order to care for people who are calling out for me? Particularly if that's a struggle of yours and you find yourself on that spectrum, you find yourself more on the side of, turning people away, turning everybody away and never ever breaking out of Sabbath or rest mode. More often than not, that is a sign that you're running too hard. When you are in work mode, when you are in activity mode, responsibility mode, you're pushing yourself too hard, and you're depleting yourself at such a level that you can't actually tap into the compassion that we are still called to have, the love, the care that we are supposed to have. Right? Rest should never come at the expense of our compassion for the world. So, okay, let's leave it there. We've gone a little bit long today. Friends, thank you again so much for being here. I know this conversation on rest and Sabbath and taking time off and taking time away, I know it's a delicate one. I know it's one that requires some subjective nuance, right? Because each of us are living a particular existence. We're living a particular life that affords us a lot of time and space to take for ourselves, and others of us we find ourselves in a season of life where we just don't have a lot. And so my ultimate prayer is that as you're listening to this today, you did not. My biggest fear with this conversation is always adding to the burden that people feel. I hope you did not feel that from me today. I hope what today was a sort of creative conversation, an expansive conversation to help us know and to figure out and how to give ourselves permission to take time, take space, even if it's not a ton, even if it's not ideal today, take time and space for ourselves to love ourselves, to fulfill the third part of the Great Commandment. Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you again, friends, as always, for being here, and we will see you on the next one.